My name is Carolyn Walker. I'm 62 years old, a retired school teacher, and a widow for the last 7 years. I live alone now in a modest house filled with memories, most of them shaped by the love I poured into raising my only son, David. A few months ago, I gifted David and his wife Melanie a fully paid home, no mortgage, no debt. I used my life savings, told myself it was a gift of love, a foundation for their growing family. I chose the paint colors, assembled furniture in my garage, even sewed curtains by hand. It wasn't just a house, it was a piece of me. So when I received a message from David that morning, my hands trembled in a way I hadn't felt since the day we buried his father. The screen glowed with a simple sentence. "You won't be joining us on the family cruise. Melanie prefers to keep it just family." Just family, and somehow I wasn't part of that anymore. I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by the scent of the coffee I hadn't yet touched, reading the words again. My fingers were stiff, cold. I typed a single word back. "Okay." That word carried everything: the hurt, the shock, the realization. I pressed send, but inside, a voice was screaming. "So I was good enough to buy your house, but not good enough to sit at your dinner table? Not good enough to ride your cruise ship?" My heart pounded like a drum, but my face stayed still, calm, detached. And in that moment, something inside me cracked. The part that made excuses for others, the part that stayed quiet to keep the peace, that part was gone. The morning light moved slowly across the floor, touching the kitchen chairs I had once refinished by hand, the same chairs David used to sit on with his scraped knees and impossible questions about the stars. That little boy was gone, and in his place stood a man who had quietly drawn a line that I was no longer allowed to cross. The house felt unfamiliar now, like a museum of bad decisions. On the walls hung photos I had paid to take, smiles from family vacations I had fully funded. Disneyland when David was 7. Cancun when Melanie first joined the family. A cozy cabin trip I insisted on paying for that Christmas they said money was tight. I had told myself it was my gift to them, but now all I could see were receipts wrapped in photo frames. I thought back to their housewarming party last spring. The one I planned. The one I paid for. I remembered Melanie taking my hands with a tearful smile. "Carolyn, you didn't have to do this. We're so grateful. You'll always have a room here, you know that." And I believed her. Of course I did. Because mothers believe. It's what we do. I remembered the evenings I spent repainting their master bedroom while they were at work. I chose soft lavender because Melanie said it was calming. I bought new curtains online and installed them myself. Every piece of furniture in that house had my fingerprints on it. Every throw pillow, every lamp, every rug. I kept myself busy so I wouldn't have to face the quiet truth. They didn't call much. They rarely visited. But I told myself they were just busy. That's what young couples do. They work hard, they settle in, they figure it out. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was heavier than paint cans and moving boxes. The truth was that I had made myself so useful to them that they stopped seeing me as a person. I was the fixer, the helper, the wallet. And once the money had been spent, there wasn't much use for the woman attached to it. I had given too much for too long. And in return, I had been quietly erased. The next morning, the silence in the house was unbearable. It wasn't the kind of quiet that soothed. It was the kind that pressed on your chest, made your hands twitch, and reminded you that something was terribly wrong. I picked up the phone and called Nancy. She arrived within the hour. No questions, no hesitation, just like she always had. That's the thing about old friends, they know when to talk and when not to. She stepped into my kitchen, took one look at my face, and didn't need to ask what happened. "Tell me," she said gently, setting her purse down. I slid my phone across the table so she could read the message herself. Her jaw tightened as she read. She didn't speak right away, just shook her head slowly like she had expected this moment to come. "They've been planning this, Carolyn." I shook my head, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. I thought, maybe it was just Melanie. Maybe she got into his head. But David, he's not like this. Nancy looked at me with that mix of love and truth only a lifelong friend can offer. She reached across the table and took my hand in hers. "You raised a good boy," she said. "But you also raised a boy who never had to struggle, who always had you fixing things." Melanie saw that. She saw what she could shape him into. I looked away. "You made yourself small, Carolyn, and now they're treating you like you belong there." Her words hurt, because they were true. I had stayed useful so long, I forgot how to be seen. But something was shifting, and I was finally ready to be seen again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Nancy's words echoing in my mind. They've been planning this. At 2:17 a.m., I got up and walked to the kitchen. The glow from my laptop screen lit the room as I sat down, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. For years, Melanie had handled most of my online accounts. It's just easier, she'd always say with that syrupy voice. You shouldn't worry about these things in retirement. And I had believed her. I wanted to believe she was helping. I wanted to believe I still mattered. But that night, I logged in with a different kind of awareness. So at first glance, everything looked fine. My checking, savings, retirement accounts all intact. Nothing jumped out. But that's how it works, doesn't it? The danger hides behind the ordinary. So I dug deeper. And there they were, multiple transfers, small amounts, spread over time, labeled things like property maintenance, home repair, emergency fund. But I hadn't approved any emergency repairs. I hadn't authorized any linked payments. I clicked further. The destination accounts weren't in my name. They were in Melanie's. She had added herself as a secondary user, quietly, smoothly. She had been skimming from me, bleeding my account slowly, so it wouldn't raise alarms. So this wasn't just a case of thoughtlessness. This was theft, with a smile. And David? Was he blind? Or did he just not care, as long as the money kept flowing? I sat back in my chair, heart racing, not with fear, but with something colder, sharper. A clear realization settled into me like ice. They weren't planning to hurt me later. They were already doing it. And they thought I'd never notice. But I had noticed. And I wasn't going to sit quietly anymore. By morning, I had already made up my mind. No more silence, no more waiting for another betrayal. It was time to move. I called Mr. Harris, my attorney. He'd handled my affairs for years, helped with my will, my retirement planning, even the documents I signed when I transferred the house to David and Melanie. He picked up right away. And Mrs. Walker, good to hear from you. Everything all right? No, I said calmly, and that's why I need to see you today. He cleared his schedule. Within hours, I was sitting across from him in his office, hands folded neatly in my lap. I want to reverse the house transfer, I told him. Lock down every account. Cancel all powers of attorney. Every single one. He paused. Not because he disagreed, but because he understood what that meant. This could cause tension, he said gently. They already caused tension, I replied. I was just too blind to see it. He nodded. Very well, we'll begin the reversal process. But Carolyn, if you suspect financial abuse, we'll need evidence. Detailed records. I have some, I said, and slid a printed spreadsheet across the table. And I want more. He raised an eyebrow. Are you open to hiring a private investigator? I didn't hesitate. Hire whoever you trust. He nodded again. Then we move quickly. I'll begin the filings. And the investigator can start building the paper trail. As I walked out of his office, something in me had shifted. It wasn't just about stopping them anymore. It was about reclaiming myself quietly, methodically, and with the kind of strength they never saw coming. That afternoon, I returned home and sat at the kitchen table, the sun warming my face. For the first time in weeks, my hands didn't shake. They thought I would stay quiet. They thought I was still the woman who signed anything placed in front of her with a polite smile. But that woman was gone. And the one who replaced her had no intention of being erased. The next morning, I found an envelope slipped under my front door. White, plain, familiar. Melanie always used those when she sent over paperwork she'd helped organize for me. On top was a yellow sticky note in her looping handwriting. Just sign whenever you're ready, Mom. It'll make everything easier while we're away. I hadn't heard the front door open, which meant they had probably sent someone else perhaps before leaving for their cruise. They were already gone. Off on sapphire blue waters, sipping cocktails and posing for photographs. Meanwhile, this little envelope waited on my kitchen counter, patient as a trap. I opened it carefully. The documents inside were professionally typed, tidy, precise. On the surface, they looked harmless routine updates, estate simplifications, household authorizations. But as I read line by line, My stomach turned. Buried deep in the legal jargon was a new power of attorney. Permanent. Tane. Irrevocable. It would grant Melanie complete control not just over my finances, but my property, my medical decisions, even the authority to admit me into care facilities without my consent. They weren't waiting for me to grow old or weak. They were preparing to take everything while I was still alive. It wasn't about inheritance. It was about control. I stared at the papers for a long moment, then slowly placed them back into the envelope. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood still, one hand resting on the counter as I let the weight of it all settle over me. Then I whispered into the quiet kitchen, as though speaking to the woman I used to be. You almost signed this. Almost. But not today. Today, I saw it for what it was. And I would use this document not to surrender but as evidence. Because they thought they were 2 steps ahead. But I had just caught up. And I was already turning the tide. By noon, I was back in Mr. Harris' office. This time, there was no small talk. He saw the look on my face and simply nodded. They tried to slide this under my door while they were on a cruise, I said, handing him the envelope. He opened it slowly, his eyes narrowing as he read the fine print. When he reached the section on irrevocable authority, he exhaled sharply. This isn't just unethical, he said. It's predatory. If I had signed this, I replied, they could have sold my home, drained my accounts, even admitted me to a care facility, all while smiling to my face. He looked at me carefully, waiting for the panic. But there was none. Let's move faster, I said firmly. His expression shifted, respect replacing concern. We already have most of the paperwork prepared, he said. The reversal on the house deed is filed. The asset freeze is underway. The investigator has started a full financial audit. But after seeing this, he tapped the envelope. We'll take more aggressive steps. Lock down every account. No one touches your assets without your signature. I nodded. And one more thing, he added. We're drafting a protective clause. If they attempt any legal coercion, we'll have a full timeline of manipulation ready to present in court. I leaned back in the chair, my breath steady, my shoulders loose. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I was building. And I was building something they wouldn't see until it stood between us like a wall. When I returned home that afternoon, the house looked the same, but everything had changed. Because I had changed. The woman who once paid for everything in hopes of being loved had been replaced by someone else. Someone who was done apologizing for surviving. Someone who finally realized that peace doesn't come from being accepted. It comes from protecting your boundaries and knowing your worth. And now I was protecting both. 4 days later, their cruise ship docked. I was already there. I parked a block away and stood quietly across the street, watching as David and Melanie pulled up in their SUV, tan and relaxed, luggage piled high in the trunk. Melanie stepped out first, barking orders about scheduling the mortgage finalization. David trailed behind her, scrolling through his phone, detached as always. And then they both froze. 2 unfamiliar cars were parked in the driveway. A moving van. A young couple stood near the front door, laughing with a realtor. Boxes were being unloaded. It took them a second to realize what they were seeing. David was the first to speak. Mom? His voice wavered, confused, uncertain. Melanie's face tightened. What's going on? Who are these people? I stepped forward, slow and calm. You won't have to manage anything for me anymore, I said. Melanie's tone sharpened. What does that mean? David looked around in panic. Why are there people in our house? It's not your house, I said evenly. Not anymore. Melanie moved toward me, her voice rising. You can't do this. We're refinancing, we have contracts. I reached into my bag and handed David a folder. Here are the only contracts that matter. He opened it with trembling hands, flipping through the pages: house reversal, sale documentation, financial audit, copies of unauthorized transactions. Melanie snatched the folder from him, scanning the documents like a drowning woman searching for a rope. She looked up, eyes blazing. None of this will hold up. We were helping you. You'll regret this. I held her gaze. You mean draining my accounts while smiling in my face? Feeling legal authority behind my back? Listing my home as collateral while I sat in the dark? David whispered, we didn't mean. I raised my hand. No, you didn't mean to get caught. Silence followed, the kind that cuts deeper than yelling ever could. Then, I pulled out a second folder and gave it to Melanie. Inside were full legal records, every forged signature, every financial abuse, every coercive tactic. If you take me to court, I said calmly, this becomes public record. They stood frozen, pale, defeated. I looked at David, my son, and said my final words. I was your mother. You made me your target. Then I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I drove home slowly, the sun dipping low behind the rooftops. My new apartment was modest, no marble counters, no curated furniture, but it was mine. Fully mine. I placed my phone face down on the table, ignoring David's final text, one last plea dressed as regret. I had nothing left to give. And in that emptiness, I found something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. They thought I would fall apart without them. But the truth was, I had been buried under them for far too long. Quiet doesn't mean weak. It means listening. And now I speak only for me.